The greatest culture shock you'll ever experience in your life is the culture shock provided by your own home country, especially if you come from an isolated and insular culture like that of the United States of America. And if you don't believe me, believe them. Because in this video, I'm going to be reacting to Americans realizing just how weird America actually is after living abroad. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this first video.
I experienced a lot of reverse culture shock when I first moved back to America in January. I was only in Germany for 3 years, and I really did not think I was going to experience reverse culture shock.
So 3 years is a long time. 3 years is a very long time. I know there are people who have lived overseas for multiple decades, but that doesn't negate the fact that 3 years is a very long time for the human brain. In 3 years, in any environment, you are going to adapt. This is why when people go to prison for multiple years and they come back home, they are not the same, at least in the American prison system. I don't know about the European prison systems, but even after 2 weeks in Europe for the first time, I came back to the USA with a whole different perspective on life. So 3 years, that's going to change the way you think, whether you know it or not.
When I moved back, but those 3 years I was gone, a lot happened here in America, and it felt like I was moving back to a place that I no longer recognized. I'll do a complete series on specific reverse culture shocks, but just to name a few, people in America seem so angry and upset. I see more altercations on a day-to-day basis than I ever did in Germany.
So honestly, that wasn't really my experience going back to the US. And that's just me personally. I'm not saying that's not the case. But statistically speaking, it is a lot more unsafe in just about any American city than in most European cities. This is a fact. This is not opinion. This is not anecdote. This is statistics. So I can see how her experience would have lined up with those statistics. But I feel like not so much violence, but tension was what I observed whenever I returned to the US. Specifically, this last time I returned to the US in, I want to say it was the end of March 2025. Was there for 3 months, and I just felt like things were a lot more tense, maybe more individualistic than I recall. That sense of community where you just had kids outside playing and neighbors talking to each other, that sort of didn't seem to exist as much. Not saying it doesn't exist at all, but in my experience, it felt a lot more tense overall. And mind you, the area I returned to, which was the area that I grew up in, is not a violent area by any means, statistically speaking. Maybe more violent than a lot of European cities, but by American standards, I grew up pretty well off. Middle, maybe upper middle class. But that tension was palpable. And I assume a lot of it is because of the political climate in the US.
The cost of living is absolutely outrageous. Healthcare, I literally could go on and on.
She did not lie about that. When it comes to the cost of living, and look, I don't even have American health insurance, so I can't even comment on that, but we already know the situation with that. People are literally going bankrupt because of their medical expenses. But when it comes to things like food or accommodation, I felt that squeeze before I even went to Europe for the first time. And that was actually one of my biggest culture shocks upon arriving in Spain, because the thing is, I think I've mentioned this in other videos, but in case you haven't seen those videos, in the US, there's kind of this misconception that only rich people go to Europe, therefore Europe must be an expensive place to be. And what I quickly found was that it's literally the opposite. Europe, at least the countries that I've been to, except for Switzerland, that's pretty much the only exception, Spain and the Netherlands at the very least, and Belgium, were all noticeably cheaper than the US while providing a significantly higher quality of life. And that's when I knew, once I saw those grocery prices, I knew I need to be here. I need to be here, not in the US. And when you go back to the US and you see those grocery prices for the first time, after being in a place like Germany, I'd imagine, which I think Germany is even cheaper than the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken. Let me know if I'm wrong about that in the comments. I can see how that would be a major shock to your system and your bank account.
There are so many things that after living in another country, moving back to America, I question of like why we do things the way we do here in America, because there's other ways to do things that, in my experience, like living in Germany, worked a lot better. But I know people have lots of opinions about it. I'll do a whole series on like things in more detail, but
So we're definitely going to have to look deeper into her profile to see what that series is talking about. But one thing that immediately popped into my mind as she was talking about things that Americans can't seem to get a grasp on that European countries just normalize is the lack of guns. The lack of guns. For whatever reason, a large percentage of the population continues to be pro-gun, and I cannot for the life of me understand it. I mean, we see the news stories, we see the statistics. Americans know that the US has an issue with gun violence, and yet they refuse to do anything about it because the good guys with guns will defend the civilians from the bad guys with guns, or whatever other twisted, convoluted arguments or rebuttals they use. It just doesn't make any sense, because when you go to Europe, you don't see good guys or bad guys with guns because people just don't use guns. Does that mean that crime doesn't exist? No, it doesn't. There are still murders in every European country. But when you look at the murder rate of a place like the Netherlands compared to the US, it is a night and day difference. This is not anecdotal. This is statistical. This is factual. And perhaps that's a big part of the reason why I felt that tension when I did return to the US. Maybe that tension wasn't so much in the environment. Maybe it was me projecting the way I felt being back there, because I knew that at any given moment, someone could pull out a gun and shoot me. And for whatever reason, Americans see this happening, and around 50 to 55% of them don't see a problem with it. They see that as par for the course. On to the next video.
I don't think a lot of people know this, but when you've been living in another country for a year plus and you come back to your home country for the first time, it can be a really big reverse culture shock to you.
Very, very true. And if you're from somewhere outside of the US, especially if you're from Europe, which I know most of my audience is, let me know, after which vacation did you feel the greatest amount of reverse culture shock? What culture gave you the biggest sense of contrast to that of your own? Let me know in the comments.
For example, in Spain, you don't give them your credit card when you pay. They usually come to you and you scan your card to pay, and you will always hold your credit card. You never give it to anyone. That's like a no-go zone. Whereas here in the States, you always give your credit card when you pay for something. They take it and they walk away with it. At first, I was kind of panicking, but then I was like, wait, I've done this for 10 plus years before I even moved to Spain. Why am I freaking out? But it's because I was so used to not giving them my card, and the mentality of you should never give anyone your card is still ingrained in my mind.
So that's an interesting one, because to her point, it's completely normal in the US to do that. But once you experience not doing that, you realize, wait, this is kind of sketchy, because this person, I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know what their financial situation is or what they're willing to do to change their financial situation. So what's to stop them from just writing down my card info when no one's looking, or taking a quick little picture with their phone in the back room when no one's watching? The answer is nothing. There is nothing to prevent them from doing that. So although I've never heard of that actually happening, I'm sure it does happen. And after being in Europe, where that is simply not a thing, even something as simple as handing the cashier at the grocery store here in Vietnam my card so that they can scan it right in front of me still kind of makes me feel uncomfortable.
Another culture shock is drive-thrus. Guys, there are no drive-thrus in Spain, at least that I've seen, but here in America, the culture is huge. You know, we go on Starbucks drive-thrus, CVS drive-thrus. It has...
Now that I think about it, I don't think I saw any drive-thrus in Spain. I'm pretty sure I saw at least a few in the Netherlands, at least for McDonald's and Burger King, but I don't think I ever saw a drive-thru in Spain, or Switzerland, or Belgium, maybe London. I don't really remember. I just know that in Spain, for sure, I never saw any. Let me know if you have drive-thrus in your country. I know for sure that in the Netherlands they don't have the drive-thru pharmacies though, because when we went back to the US earlier this year, like I mentioned before, my girlfriend pointed that out. She was like, wait, you can drive through the pharmacy? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, what? She was really, really shocked by that. But it never occurred to me that they just don't have that in most other places. Even from what I've seen in Thailand and Vietnam, that's not a very common thing to have.
It's been such a shock to have that accessibility and to use a car. I mean, that's game changer, hands down. Another shock is being in Spain, you always walk, you use public transport, you see a lot of people on your day-to-day basis, whereas here, because you have your own car, you're in your own house, I feel like it's almost a bit more isolated, so I'm not meeting as many people, I'm not talking as much, which was kind of a weird transition for me because...
So, whenever my girlfriend visited the US for the first time, back in 2023, that was one of the first things that she pointed out. She was like, it feels like a zombie apocalypse happened here or something. There's nobody out and about. Where are all the people walking? Where are the people cycling? And I was like, oh, you have a lot to learn because in Texas, that is simply not a thing. Texas is probably one of the most extreme examples when it comes to the lack of pedestrians. But she was very shocked to find that the city that we were in, city that I grew up in, had over 100,000 people. I'm pretty sure in the Netherlands it would qualify as a top 15 or 20 city by population, but you would never know it from walking around. And after living in the Netherlands for 14 months and then returning to the US, that was probably the single biggest reverse culture shock that I personally had, was just the lack of people out and about. And to her point, it does feel very isolating at times.
It's also in Spain, everyone loves to chat and they love to, ask how your day is going. Whereas here, it's definitely a bit more reserved, at least in the state where I live. And yeah, it's been super weird for me. Okay, and last, the unlimited options we have with cereals, the frozen food aisle, the sauces. I mean, it's just insane. I walked into a Target the other day and I was like, oh my God, what are all these cereals? How am I gonna pick one? I mean, there's so many options, which is why I kind of like Spain a bit better because they make the options more limited, meaning you feel more satisfied with the choice you're making.
So, to her point, that cereal section is no joke. And so far, the US is the only place I've seen that had a cereal section like that. Because I feel like, at least in the Asian countries I've been to thus far, been to Thailand and now I'm in Vietnam, they have a fairly wide selection of certain things, but cereals are pretty much never one of them. I've never seen a cereal section even remotely similar to that of the US, especially in a place like Walmart or Target. And for a while, this kind of confused me because I kind of realized that, wait, 20% of these cereals are going to drive 80% of the profits, and really that applies to any and all products in the store, so why wouldn't they just optimize the store for those 20% of products that actually generate the most profits and lower their overhead by having smaller stores and probably a smaller staff? To me, that just made sense, and as a business owner, that's how I think, at least with my channel. But someone in the comments of one of my videos, when I brought that point up in the video, said something along the lines of they have those options not to encourage people to purchase those options, but more as psychological anchors. And I don't remember the exact logistics of how that works, but I mean, I guess it makes sense because clearly Walmart and these big box stores are making a lot of money, but that's something that I really did appreciate about Europe, the Netherlands in particular, is that although the stores were smaller and had less selection, the things that they actually had were things that I actually purchased or wanted to purchase, especially as a vegan. In the US, they have this whole cereal section, and most of it is stuff that you will never even think about trying. And I know that most people are not thinking about trying them. But I don't know. Let me know what the cereal section looks like where you're from. On to the next video.
Part 5, last part for now, unless something really cool happens tonight. Americans are so progressive with the technology, you guys. We gotta get France. What are we doing?
I don't think I've ever heard someone say America or the US is progressive in terms of technology compared to European countries. That's just my personal experience. I feel like going to the US from Europe is a step backwards in most technological ways. And that's not to even take Asia into account, because let's say, for example, in the place that we're staying in here in Vietnam, that door that we have, I'm talking about, it has digital buttons and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I get that the US is a large driver of technological innovation, but when you look at the majority of the country and the basic things, the basic technological, I won't call them necessities, but the basic technological infrastructure, it doesn't seem to do a good job of handling the simple tasks. And this is kind of the analogy that I draw. If you watch basketball, you'll understand this. If you don't, then I guess you won't. But the US is like a basketball player who can dunk from the free throw line, but can't actually shoot free throws, if that makes sense. So they can do the spectacular, but when it comes to the fundamentals, they don't really have a good grasp on that. Maybe in association football, it'd be like a player who's really, really good at doing bicycle kicks, but not good at making a simple pass. I don't really know all the terminology for association football, but that's kind of what the US is.
When people go out to dinner here, what they do, one person pays and everyone Venmos each other. That's just like how it goes. I went out to dinner with like a bunch of people this week, obviously, and the looks I got when I was like, can we split it? They were like, I can just Venmo you. Venmo is like Lydia or Pumpkin, which kicked off all the Americans, because America is the only country in the world that makes its citizens pay tax on foreign earned income. And basically, banks don't want to deal with Americans because it's annoying. So
as far as America making its citizens pay tax on foreign earned income, there is this misconception that because the US taxes its citizens no matter where they are, that Americans get taxed twice. That's not necessarily the case. So the vast majority of European countries, as well as a plethora of Asian and South American countries, and maybe even African countries, have double taxation treaties with the US. What this basically means in practice is that as an American living abroad, I have to file American taxes every year as if I still lived there, but I don't have to pay American taxes. So it's incredibly inconvenient that I still have to file them, but I definitely do not have to pay them. So big misconception that I wanted to clear up, especially if you're looking to live abroad as an American.
whatever. Venmo for everything. Dude, I just bought a pair of pants at Levi's. Levi's accepts Venmo. Levi's accepts Venmo. And then the guys on the street selling counterfeit bags, which I would know nothing about because I would never buy a counterfeit bag, they accept Venmo too. And the homeless people accept Venmo. Everyone's Venmo this, Venmo that. Guys, we gotta get with the times.
So personally, I don't really have a very positive opinion of Venmo. And the reason why I say this is because, and by the way, I'm not sponsored by any of these financial institutions or whatever. So this is just my own personal opinion based on my experience. But recently I shut down a coaching program that I was running in order to focus more on this YouTube channel. And in the process, of course, because I like to conduct good business, I refunded the people who were in the coaching program, at least relative to how long they were in the coaching programs. And when I was issuing out the refunds, I processed those refunds through a variety of different apps, Venmo being one of them. Venmo did not allow any of those refunds to go through. And it was incredibly frustrating, and I think I literally just deleted the app from my phone because it just wasn't working. So I feel like, again, the US, they can do the bicycle kick, they can dunk from the free throw line, but they can't shoot the free throw or make the regular pass or that regular goal. They can't do the simple stuff. And maybe France is a little bit different because that's what she's comparing the US to. But in the Netherlands, they have this thing called Tiki, which I've literally never had any issues with at all. So they definitely have those sorts of things in at least the Netherlands, and I'd imagine in much of the rest of Europe. But let me know in the comments what your primary method of transferring money digitally is in your country.